Hi, this is Irv Shapiro of Make with Tech. For those of you that have been watching the channel for a while, you know that I've been on a search for the ideal first 3D printer. That's the 3D printer for someone who's new to the hobby, to the craft, who doesn't want to do a lot of assembly, who wants to take a printer out of the box and use it. And because this hobby has a lot of details, that's a hard thing to do, to make that perfect printer. Well, we have a new candidate today, and that candidate is from Mingda. It's called the Magician X, and it has a very interesting set of features. Features you're seeing on more and more printers, but generally at a higher price point. So let's take a look today, and let's see if we can learn something together. Here at the Make with Tech channel, we teach people how to use desktop technologies, 3D printing, a bit of electronics, a bit of software, a little bit of woodworking to make things, to make interesting things that you can use around your house for functional or aesthetic purposes. We teach you how to make toys, how to make security monitoring systems, a variety of things. So if you're interested in learning how to make stuff, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll be notified about new videos. And you can also go to a free service I provide for the community at forum.makewithtech.com, where you can leave pictures of your builds of the things you make, along with questions for a community of thousands of users who are helping each other out. Now, when the marketing department at Mingda reached out to me, and they reached out to me multiple times on both email and WhatsApp, and it sort of surprised me to get a WhatsApp from them, they asked me to do a review of the printer. And I thought, do I really want to do another review of another Ender style printer with a similar print volume, similar features? But after they persisted, I dug in a bit, and the feature set on this printer is very high-end for the price. And so I thought it would be worth taking a look and seeing for my readers if this is a printer I would recommend to somebody specifically who's new to 3D printing, or is this better suited as a second printer for somebody who already perhaps has one, or is it a printer I really can't recommend at all? The Mingda Magician X 3D printer has a rich set of features. But one of the things that makes it most interesting for people just starting off in 3D printing is it comes 90% assembled. Basically, there are two parts in the box. There's a base, and there's this gantry that has the horizontal, the x-axis, all of the hot end components already pre-assembled. You take this, you slide it into two brackets on the side here, and you put in a couple bolts, and you're done. All that's left of the assembly is connecting these cables, which are color-coded and easy to assemble. It took me 5 minutes. I've assembled a lot of 3D printers. Maybe it will take you 10 minutes. Now you might ask, why doesn't it come fully assembled? Well, because one of the secrets of shipping internationally is you often ship based on volume and not based on weight. So a fully assembled printer is bigger, it just takes a lot of space. Whereas if you take this off and lie it flat, you have a much smaller assembly. Now I'm keeping the box that came with this because it's so easy to take apart that this is a printer I might take places with me. The print volume on this printer is 230 by 230 by 260. It has a removable glass textured print bed. Now, why would you want a removable print bed when it's glass and it's not flexible? Well, the reason is that it makes it easier to get prints off. Because these print beds, when they're new, they stick really well. And the surface has to be very cool, about 21 to 22 degrees Celsius, for your print to come off. And even then, I often use a single edge razor blade paint scraper in order to get a corner up to lift them off. But there's an easier way if the print bed comes off. Take the whole thing and put it in the freezer. You put it in the freezer for about 5 minutes, the print will pop right off. When I don't have that option, I'll often put a fan in front of the printer to cool down the bed more quickly, because above about 2122 C, your print's going to stick very hard. Now, as the beds age, sometimes they work a little less well, and this style of print bed is being used across the industry. In that case, I like putting either a little bit of Magic Goo or Dimifix, and Dimifix is my new favorite, on the print bed about every 4 or 5 prints, and that seems to ensure prints will stick correctly. I had no trouble with this printer. One of the features that's interesting on this printer is that right on the front you have 3 options for connecting to the printer. You can use a USB-C cable. Now I find it has to be USB-C to USB-A for your computer to recognize it, and I'll show you that in a few moments. You can use a full-size SD card. That's wonderful. They're not the tiny ones that you lose. Or you can use an actual USB drive, a USB key drive in this printer. And you have the option when you go to print, it asks you to select where you're printing from. The extruder on this printer is a direct extruder. You notice there's no Bowden tube at all. I have the filament coming down to the extruder. It is a dual gear direct extruder. That means there are 2 gears, and I'll show you a picture from the Mingda website of the inside of that printer, and I'll also take and show you something very interesting. You take this one screw out and you can open up the printer. I'll show you a close-up of that. It makes it very easy, if the filament's stuck, to get in there with a needle nose pliers and pull it out. So I think the overall design of this is very, very good. There is a spring and a screw here so you can adjust the tension, and you don't want it too tight or you'll chew up your filament. There are dual fans, and the cooling on this printer is good. I wouldn't say it's the very best I've seen. Some of the higher end printers have 3 fans. This one has dual fans, but it is very, very good. The X-axis is on standard sort of Creality style wheels. And on the bottom wheel, and I'll show you in a photo here, you have an eccentric screw. And what that eccentric screw is for is so that you can take and adjust the tension of these wheels. So when you turn the eccentric screw with the wrench that's supplied, and it goes right in under here, you can move that bottom wheel up or down. And you want it so that when you manually turn these wheels, the whole gantry turns, but not so tight that it doesn't run smoothly. The hot end assembly is attached with a single ribbon cable. Now in my case, this ribbon cable had a little bit of a kink in it that I actually had to sort of smooth out with my fingers to ensure that I could go all the way to the end smoothly. A very minor issue. The belt on this gantry does have an adjustment, as does the belt on the bed. And the bed also has a pair of eccentric bolts that you can adjust on one side to ensure that the bed is nice and firm. Once again, you want this to move nice and smoothly. These belts should be firm to the touch. If they're loose, you're going to get more vibration, and that's going to show up as ghosting in your prints. So everything on this printer is easily adjustable. When loading the filament, unfortunately I did not find that it will automatically pull in the filament. There is a load-unload function on the front panel. We'll show you that in a moment. So I found that I had to actually just pull this lever down a bit, push the filament in far enough so it felt like it was past the gears. And then when I used the load function on the front, everything worked properly. The printer comes standard with auto bed leveling, but you won't see a sensor anywhere here because there's an actual sensor on the back of the print mechanism, and it's using the nozzle to sense the bed. So I'll show you what that looks like in a few moments. The printer is quiet. It's quiet because it has TMC drivers. They do use a custom control board on this printer. I'll show you a picture of that, and it looks like a generic power supply. There are 2 fuses on the control board, which is an excellent, excellent design feature. And I didn't notice anywhere on this printer a switch for 110, 220. You'll want to double check that. So it appears it's an automatic sensing switching power supply. Now I do have one observation about the design. On the design of this printer, there's a little piece of plastic here, and I'll show you a close-up of that goes into a sensor down here on the bottom. And that little piece of plastic blocks a optical sensor. So there's a little LED, a sensor, and the plastic blocks the optical sensor, and that's how it knows when the bed is at the bottom. Mine didn't work when I first turned it on. So I connected a USB-C cable to the front of the printer, USB-A on the other side, and I connected it to my computer. Then I went into a utility that I provide to the 3D printing community at no charge. And that's a website you can use as a terminal in front of your computer. And I went to 3D-printing-tools.makewithtech.com. I'll show you the URL down here on the screen. And we can look at this together. And I issued a command to determine if this sensor was triggered when the gantry was all the way in the bottom. Now, how did I move the gantry to the bottom? Well, when I turned it on and hit level, the gantry went to the bottom and started grinding because it didn't sense it. So I went into the terminal emulator and I noticed the sensor was not triggered. I thought maybe the sensor was bad. I checked the connection on the control board. I reached out to Mingda, and what they said was that this little piece of plastic here sometimes is a bit warped. And if it is, you just pull it out and hold it for a minute, and then it will be in the proper position. Well, I tried that a couple times. It kept going back to the original position. So you can see here in this photo that what I ended up doing is taking a little bit of a business card and just gluing it to make it a little wider. Since then, Mingda has reached back to me and said they've made a modification to the design to correct that problem. So if you have an earlier version of this printer and it's not triggering, a little piece of cardboard is the solution. So let's show you what that bed leveling startup looks like. So the power for the printer is next to the cable on the side. And I have this turned towards me so I can see it, but I'll show you close-ups of all these screens. So here on the main screen, you can see it's very, very clear. They're good icons. There is a button for print and a button for level right on the main screen. And the reason is that one of the things they're proud of at Mingda is that this has an ABL system that you don't adjust at all. There are no knobs on the bottom of this print bed. Now, generally I don't like that design, but this is pretty solid and it seemed to work well. So let me show you what it looks like when you hit level. So I'm going to click on the level button, and it's going to inform me it's going to wait to warm up the print bed and the extruder. That's wonderful, because many ABL systems do not, auto bed leveling systems do not do that first. And materials expand when they heat up, so the distance would be different. So they're going to heat up the hot end, I believe, to 150 C. They heat up the bed to about 50 C, and we'll let they heat up, and then you'll see this go through the auto leveling process. Okay, we're almost up to temperature, so any moment now you're going to see the printer home the print head. That's what it's doing now. It's checking that the X sensor is working, and now it's going to check that the Z sensor is working. And this is the sensor where I added that little bit of a business card to the end to ensure that it blocks the optical sensor path. So we'll see it go down to the bed and then stop. Now, in fact, it stops just a little bit above the bed, and then it very slowly moves the final distance until the print head touches the print bed and senses its position. Okay, we are ready to get started. Now, I'm going to actually move the print head up a bit by going to the front panel, going and clicking on the menu icon, the move icon, and this screen with the movements is labeled very clearly with arrows, so you know whether Z plus or Z minus, which one goes up or down. So we're going to move the Z axis up just a little bit. Here we go. And this will make it easier when we're loading the filament to see the filament extruding. Now, we'll go hit back until we get to the main menu again. Now, the way you load filament on this printer is you pull this little lever out, you take a piece of filament that we've cut on an angle, you insert it into the printer until you feel it come to a stop. So you want to make sure you push it in as far as you can. Then you go to Menu, and the option is called Extruder, and you'll see there's an unload and there's a load there. So if you click load, nothing's going to happen. It's going to give you a warning if the printer is not up to temperature. So what I'm actually going to do here is go back and click on the thermometer first, and you'll see there are options to preheat for different filaments. And it's very nice on this printer, you can set the temperatures for those preheats. I'm going to click on PLA. I'm going to go back to the front, and I'm going to wait until it gets up to about 200 C. Preheat is defined as 220, but 200 would be enough to load the filament. Okay, now I'm going to click on Menu, and then I'm going to click on Extruder, and I'm going to click on Load. And once again, the icon is very well done. And each time I click on Load, it's going to extrude 5 millimeters of filament. Now that's not 5 millimeters out of the nozzle, it's 5 millimeters being fed in. So I can click that multiple times, and you'll see right over here, you'll see the filament is coming out properly. So I now have the filament loaded on the printer. The next step would be to click back till I get to the main menu, and then click on Print. And you'll notice here I now have an option for SD card or U-Disk. U-Disk is formally, it's actually a micro hard drive on a USB connector, but it's also used to indicate a USB, what we often call a USB key or a USB drive. I'm going to select SD card, and let me select one of the prints here. I'm going to select the bed leveling print. And the printer will now come up to temperature, and then it will start printing. Now, in order to start printing, you need a file on the SD card that's in the G-code format. And the way you get that file into the G-code format, and those of you that have used 3D printers for a while know this, you take often an STL file or another three-dimensional file and use a slicer. The slicer they recommend for this printer is the slicer called Cura. So let's take a look at Cura together and get an idea about how you would set up this printer. Okay, I'm in Cura. I happen to be in Cura 4.13, the latest version, but any of the 4-dot versions, 4-dot, let's say 6 or 7 or later would be fine. Now you'll see here that I already have the printer defined, but we're going to pretend I don't. So I'm going to go to Add Printer. I'm going to say Non-Network Printer, and I'm going to click on Custom. And I'm going to give this a name and click Add. And now there are two things I have to do that are very important. The first is I have to put in the proper size for this printer. I have to click on Heated Bed, and then this is very important. I need to go over to Extruder. I need to make sure it's set for 0.4 millimeters and that the material size is 1.75. If you do not do that, the printer will under extrude significantly. Now I'm going to click on Next. Now, In the user's guide that comes with the printer, they indicate that on the SD card is a profile that you should load. So you take the SD card and you put it into your computer. Then you go back over here to Manage Printers and click on the tab that says Profiles, and then click on Import. And then you look on the SD card and you want to find this file that says PLA plus Cura Profile. You say Open, and it says that profile has now been imported. So now you have a printer defined, and if you go over here, you can select that profile. That one happened to import under the name PLA plus number 2. And now we're ready to print. But there's potentially one problem. So I printed the print that came on the SD card, some of those samples, they came out fine. I went to print some other prints. I was having trouble with the prints sticking on the print bed. Now that didn't make sense to me because this is an auto bed leveled printer. Now I noticed it wasn't doing an auto bed level at the beginning of the prints. And so I started thinking maybe it's not using auto bed leveling. So let me show you what you do to ensure it's using auto bed leveling. If you go back to Manage Printers, with your printer selected, you go back to Machine Settings, and you'll notice there's Start Code and End Code here. Well, I'm going to recommend use different start code, and I'll list that in the description for you to make it easier. But the most important thing is right after this G28, you need to add another command. And you have two options. The G28 will home the printer to its start position. And depending on how the manufacturer configures the Marlin firmware that's in the printer, and this is a very technical issue, auto bed leveling will be turned off every time you home the printer. Now, that's not what we want. Now, there is an option to have it automatically turn on after homing, and I reached out to Mingda, and they indicated it was turned on, but I did some testing and I'm not sure. So one thing you could do is you could put a G29 right here. G29 says run the auto bed leveling sequence every time you start a print. So after you home, you could do a G29. Alternatively, you could put a M420 S1 in here. That's a command that says use the saved auto bed leveling information for the print to make sure the nozzle is exactly the right height, but don't do that probing every time. So that's generally what I do. Now, since adding that, all of my prints have worked perfectly. Now, let's actually zoom in a little bit and look at some of those prints together. The first print I'm going to look at is a print that came on the SD card. It's a flexible deer. It came on the SD card. Mine actually had a slight defect. This last leg, it seems to be not snapped on as tightly as it should. But overall, it's a pretty good print. I didn't think it was an outstanding print, but I didn't slice this print. And all the rest of the prints you're going to see today are sliced on the latest version of Cura, which is really quite excellent. So this was a good print. The prints in white are printed in Hatchbox PLA. The prints in red are on the Matter Hackers Build PLA. So then I started doing some standard test prints that I do for all the 3D printers I'm testing. And one of the first prints I printed was a calibration cat. Now, when you look at the close-up of this, it won't look great because it zoomed in so tight that you can see all the layer lines. But at a traditional distance, this print looks very, very good. The overhangs are nice and clean. The features are clear. The pointed ears are pointy. But one of the reasons you print this is so that you can verify that the dimensions, that the extrusion is proper. This is supposed to be 20 millimeters. And what do we have here? 20.05. That's pretty darn close. Let's check the other dimension. exactly 20.05, 20.06. So this is almost perfectly square. Now that would indicate that this fancy extruder on this printer is working very well. I wanted to verify that. So I hooked the printer up to my 3D printing tool utility again. I'll show you the URL down below. And I did a calibration test of the extruder. And the instructions for that are in the utility. And this is the closest of any printer, I'll show you a picture here, that I've ever done right out of the factory. It was perfect. I also did a tuning of the temperature of this printer, which is called PID tuning. Both those features work very, very well with this printer. So it's running a complete version of Marlin. Now, next, I thought I'd print something a little different in vase mode. This is completely hollow, it's just the shell. This print is as close to perfect as a vase mode print I could print, except for one minor defect here on the top, and the point has a little bit of stringing. So I verified with this print that while this printer has auto power fail recovery, and I've tested that and it works properly, it does it in a way that does not impact vase mode. Unfortunately, some of the printers from a major manufacturer that are coming out recently don't work properly in vase mode because of a defect in auto power recovery. And those printers, they're constantly writing a file to the SD card, and that write operation is interfering with vase mode, which is where your printer prints a continuous line of filament all the way to the top. So, interesting print, but not very difficult. So I wanted to do something a little bit harder. So I printed a very large vase, which was I don't know, about a 4 or 5 hour print. And this one is also just outstanding. This is an outstanding print, absolutely beautiful. Then I decided I'd really stress this printer by printing a test print. Now this test print here from Kickstarter is very, very difficult to print successfully. And in particular, the little spheres, the little towers at the top, you rarely get a print where all of them are properly formed. This printer did a really good job. And there's a little bit of sort of cotton candy-like stringing at the top, but you could literally rub that off. Here, I just did that here. And this is a beautiful print. The only criticisms I have of this print is these overhangs right over here. They are drooping a little tiny bit. And you'll notice these pins down here. The whole idea is you're supposed to be able to push out all the pins. As you go to the right, the tolerances get tighter. Only the first two pushed out. Now that's consistent with something else I saw in some of the prints, where it looked like the printer was over extruding just a little bit, easily adjusted by adjusting your profile. I then did 2 other prints just to look at overall quality. This is a Yoda print I got off of Thingiverse. Another beautiful print. This was printed without supports, and these ears are pretty difficult to print without supports, and they're pretty darn clean. There's a little bit of rough edges here on the bottom. And then finally, I wanted to print a longer print. This is a 9-hour print. And this is just a beautiful print that you can use as part of a light with an LED light here that doesn't give off a lot of heat because this is PLA. And there are no supports used for this print. So you have all of these layers. Now there's a little bit of roughness at the bottom, which you'd expect, but that actually adds to the interest of this print. So overall, I would rate this printer as top quality. Now, does it compare to a $1,000 setup? Maybe not, but this is as good as any mid-price printer that I've looked at. This printer is available for about $330 on the manufacturer website, about $399 at Amazon. Now, to put that in perspective, an Ender 3 version 2 is anywhere from $220 to $250. So less money, but a lot less printer. The new Ender 3 S1, which has almost identical features to this printer, direct extrusion, the same sort of setup, I've noticed, and I have not reviewed this printer, but I've noticed it's selling for about $420, $430. So this is about $100 less. So where do I stand on this printer? This is an excellent printer. It's a good printer for someone new, but the issue with the Z sensor, I'd like to see that addressed, and manufacturer says they're addressing it. And the Cura setup is a little bit tricky. So the idea that I had to edit the start code to get consistent results was a little tricky. Now, once again, the manufacturer claims current firmware has the auto bed leveling automatically turned on after homing the printer. But in my printer, it didn't seem to be automatically turned on. So in summary, I can recommend this printer. I think it's a printer you should absolutely consider as both your first printer and potentially an additional printer. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was useful for you today, that you learned something. And if you did, please subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, go to forum.makewithtech.com to share pictures of your prints with other people interested about 3D printing. And let's continue to learn things together.